does. Okay, chapter 6. Make sure. Okay. Okay. Chapter 6. We then entered a period of limbo, a last gasp before the hammer fell. I remember wishing fervently that the Eulecum would see sense. I'd already witnessed enough of the action. Wait, let us go through a summary of what's happened so far. Okay, so Catania has gone from first meeting Widera on a battle cruiser. Then he went to meet Captain Bell Septimum Sepetus Sepetus. Then he met Arissa. Then Arissa told him about Bal. Then he met up again with Widera. And then him and Widera went to Baal Secundus. And then they went and met the Primarch in the lower parts of the city. And then after that, he wanted to see the front line. And also, he got to watch the negotiations and compliance that Sanguinius tries diplomatically at first, but the Wilecum do not see how the Imperium can destroy them or don't care. And now we are at chapter 6, after Sanguinius has said that if they do not agree to these terms now, he will have to exterminate the planet. Okay. Chapter 6. We then entered a period of limbo, a last gasp before the hammer fell. I remember wishing fervently that the Wilecum would see sense. I already witnessed enough of the Legion's assembled power to guess that going up against the Blood Angels would be folly, and the Primarch's demeanor in the final council had made me dread a full demonstration. In the meantime, though, I had my work to do. I was required to observe, to record, to gain a full picture of the Legion as they prepared for a war I hoped they wouldn't fight. I spoke to dozens of menials from a range of ranks. They were hard-working, capable, somewhat reserved, occasionally contemptuous of me and my task. Their loyalty to their Astartes masters was absolute. I never heard so much as a whisper against the Space Marines. I put down to their heritage on Baal, although none of them were Balides. The culture and traditions of that world had survived implantation into the Legion. They had a virtually religious attitude to the warriors they armored, fed, and kept supplied. It was a source of pride, I imagined, that a marginal, sickly race had thrown off its disadvantages and become a player in the great galactic endeavors. Their lives on those ships were hard, with no severe penalties for any failure to perform, but I heard no complaints. It was a hard galaxy, they often said, and only the strong deserved to survive within it. As the chrono clicked down towards Sanguinius's ultimatum, I attempted to make contact with the true fighting strength of the Legion, the Astartes themselves. My first attempts were rebuffed. None of them wished to have anything to do with me. They were all busy, heavily involved in their pre-combat training rituals and preparations. Belos Sepatus, one of those inducted into the Primarch's own honor guard, did not respond to my attempts to make contact, despite what he'd instructed me to do on Val Primus. I could have left it at that, but I didn't. I pushed, I cajoled, I burrowed away at any faint expression of helpfulness until it became easier to give in than keep resisting. A deck master responsible for one of hundreds of training levels finally relented, spoke to one of his masters who spoke to one of hers, and I found some doors finally opening. So it was that I met Alion. He was a standard space marine by the rank designation, although in reality there was no such thing as standard with these fighters. He was a Terran, which in those days was becoming rarer. The late stages of the Crusade had seen the Legion steadily increase its recruits from Val. He was a member of the 9th Tactical Squad of the 7th Company, one of the many detachments which had been housed within the Red Tier's cavernous innards. He was finishing a training session when I found him, down in one of the deep pits below the engineerium. It took me a long time to find it, and by the time I arrived, I was sweating and out of breath. I only witnessed the final few minutes of his regiment, and that was enough to knock the remaining spirit out of me. He wasn't fighting one of his own kind, but a combat servitor. The thing was monstrous. I even wonder if its original body might have been an abhuman's, and covered in thick armor plating. It must have stood nearly 3 meters tall, about 2 across, with an entirely enclosed helm and weapon arms terminated with multiple powered blades. The few patches of exposed muscle were a purple crimson, indicating that its bloodstream had been flooded with stems, and its elaborate armor was covered in bundles of power weapons, in bundles of power units, and drive cores, far less refined than power armor, but I doubted it was much less powerful in brute terms. To all intents and purposes, this was a Space Marine mock-up, drilled for a single aspect of combat, expendable, testing within the narrow parameters of its design. Allion was unarmored. He paced around the circular pit in a fabric tunic, offering no protection at all against those jutting blades. He carried only a glass with the energy field killed. His skin was a pale gray, and I could see the ridges of input jacks stacked across his back. The two combatants sparred and lunged, the servitor enormous and clanking, the Astartes fluid and elusive. Both of them were able to move viciously, quickly, when they wished to strike, and at first sight the contest looked somewhat chaotic, a flurry of wild movements that seemed random. It didn't help that the combat servitor gave off huge plumes of steam and smoke as its mechanics struggled to keep up with the space marine, surrounding them both in a fog of dust and kicked out straw flecks. The more I watched, though, the more I saw a pattern. Aelion wasn't trying to disable the machine. He was aiming for strikes at specific places in the servitor's armor. These were the thickest chunks of armor, corresponding to weaker points on real power armor, and they were already pitted and dented from multiple hits. The machine's two main functions seemed to be to protect those points while attempting to disable its enemy, and it did so aggressively, clunking and thrusting right at its flesh and blood opponent with a surprising degree of speed and skill. Allion ducked and darted around the scything blades, parrying the worst of the strikes before lunging in close to attempt a hit. Once I'd worked out the shape of the contest, I found it mesmerizing. The encounter had an almost balletic feel, a flickering series of intertwined limbs, metal and flesh, the sharp edges missing one another by millimeters. How long had they been at this? Hours, for all I knew. The servitor, I guessed, wasn't tired at all. The test was for the human component. It ended as it had to, with a surgical strike against the servitor's throat. The gladius spat out, weaving a path through the gyrating weapon limbs, hitting the designated target with a dull clang. The machine immediately shut down, its blades hanging mid-air, the lights across its armor flickering out. Allion drew back, panting hard, and the clouds of smoke slowly dissipated around him. Floor-level lumens glowed into life across the pit's perimeter, and a series of heavy doors slid open on the far wall. Half a dozen tech priests shuffled out of the shadows and began to inspect the damage to their creature. Only then did Allion notice me. He walked over, blade still in hand. His tunic was thick with sweat. He had a close-shorn crop of blond hair and pale brown eyes. Though his physique was formidable, it was not pleasant to look at. Every surface was pitted and marred with control nodes for his armor or old scars, or the tracery of secondary augmetics. His muscle bulk bordered on the absurd rather than the magnificent, though clearly it was effective. "You're the remembrancer," he said, reaching for a rag to wipe sweat from his brow. I looked up at him. His aroma was somewhat overpowering, a pungent chemical mix that reminded me of an overheated machine more than a mortal body. I am. That was impressive. Allianz snorted. Impressive is taking on a living thing. Then he grinned. Fancy your chances. I laughed out loud. He sheathed his blade, took up a robe, and wrapped it around those ludicrously enlarged shoulders. So what do you want? He asked, as the main door to the training pit cranked open. To discover, to learn. He pushed on into the corridor beyond, and I followed him. We were soon walking through the dimly lit, oily. uh, Um, we were soon walking through the dimly lit, oily underworld of the ship's less illustrious districts. Menials bustled around us, their faces hidden under cowls, bowing deeply to Elion when as he passed them. You would do better to witness a true battle, Elion said. This is just to keep my eye in. It looked serious enough to me. It might have wounded you. He turned to look down at me, the twitch of a smile on his calloused lips. You think it even touched me? I don't know. Did it? If it had, I'd have reported myself to my sergeant for penance. I could imagine Bell Separatist saying the same thing, but I couldn't imagine him saying it in the same way. Elion seemed lighter of heart, more energetic, more charismatic. No doubt he had fewer weighty matters of long-term strategic concern on his mind, and no burden of command, but the contrast was still clear. I liked it. I liked that this demeanor was also part of the Legion, and that they were not all angst-ridden, tight-lipped souls. He took me to his cell, located several decks higher. I recognized that this might be an honor, so did my best to be respectful. We spoke throughout while he quite unabashedly disrobed and pulse-showered, afterwards donning a shift that hid most of the heavy ironwork over his torso and shoulders. He was happy to explain the core assumptions and structures that he operated under. He gave me an insight into the nature of squad actions, of the Legion's preferences and doctrines. He talked about the older history, though. Plenty of that was before his time. He expounded his views on the crusade with candor. The great march forward, he said fervently, the expression of our species' genius. We are only its instruments, of course, though it gives me joy to be involved. It must be hard, too, I said, to lose colleagues, to be forever at war. Elion shrugged. For you, maybe. For me, no. What else is there? I barely remember what it was like before I became what I am. He grinned again. He did that a lot. And what I am is glorious. I was boastful, and he knew it. Hard to disagree all the same. I don't relish the deaths of my brothers, he went on, but I do not mourn them either. We are made to do this, and the only shame is to die without prestige. Or honor. Prestige. I want my name to be remembered. I want people to think that I died well, and that I took 1,000 enemies of the Emperor with me when I went. How close are you to that tally? Getting there. I looked around the cell. It was finely decorated. It was as finely decorated as all Blood Angel's chambers were. Tapestries hung from the walls, each one a record of a famous engagement. Candles burned softly in their alcoves, making the light warm and wavering. On a pillar in the corner was a dark bronze sculpture, a head, one that I recognized as Alion's own. Did you create this? I asked, getting up and going over to it. I did. You like it? I did. I did. Very much. Like everything these people did. It was painstaking. The expression on the bronze face was serene, confident, like an ancient god's, gazing coolly out over a field of conquest. It was idealized, I saw. The augmetics were removed, the proportions more classical, but it was unmistakably him. Who teaches you all this? I wondered aloud. How come you can all do it so well? It takes time to learn. It doesn't come easily. But we have the blood of the Primarch within us, and so we have a share of his genius. It wasn't the first time I'd heard this kind of formulation. Sometimes it felt like the Legion was simply a giant, just gestalt entity, a hundreds of thousands strong extension of a single individual. How far was that fabled gene seed doing its work, and how far was it something else? Mass psychology, perhaps? Next to the bronze head was a closed door, leading to what I guess was a further chamber. More in there? I asked lightly, reaching for the release. Alion's movement was so fast, so instant, that I didn't see it take place at all. One moment my hand was reaching out for the Georgian. The next he was beside me, his fist closed over mine. Private, he said firmly. And I think we've talked enough. I stared into his brown eyes. He wasn't angry. I didn't think, just insistent. Fine, I said, pulling my hand back, laughing it off. I defended him, or maybe just transgressed against hospitality. Either way, he wasn't moving. I backed away. I've taken up your time. He wasn't smiling now. I could tell he wanted me gone, and that made me want to stay. From why was I like this? I have things I need to do now, Allion said. I wanted so much to push this, to see what he was ashamed of in that chamber. Impossible, of course. I'd already chanced my arm, had more time with him than I expected, and it wasn't as if I could intimidate him into doing anything he didn't want to do. I'd like to talk again sometime, I said, if you can spare the time, that is. Allion didn't move a muscle. Leave a request with the deckmaster. I knew just what would happen to that. Maybe I'll come back and find you again, I said, when things calm down or the compliance is over. Allion activated the outer door release and the panel slid open. You will not be waiting long for that, he said. Sent me all the way back to the beginning. There we go. You will not be waiting long for that, he said. He was right. We weren't waiting long. When the moment came and the chance arose to see the consequences of world's defiance, it was Alion's own words that made me do it. You would do better to witness a true battle. Sanguinius hadn't wanted to fight. The reluctance hadn't been feigned. And yet, once the matter was forced, the violence unleashed was beyond imagination. I hadn't been prepared for the full scale of it, even after many warnings. Neither had the Bylekam. During the first days of the Titanic void clashes, when the massed battleships were lighting the void up with fire and fury, a delegation from the beleaguered world had tried to make contact to reverse their previous intransigence and sue for peace. They would cooperate now, they said. No need for the scale of destruction. Too late. Just as the Primarch had said, the chance had been fairly offered, and now it had gone. Orbital supremacy only took 2 days. Then the landings followed, spread out across all population centers. Blood Angel strike units took out the key defenses, while wave upon wave of well-supported auxilia overran the cities. The planning had been immaculate. I saw for myself how carefully the battlefronts overlapped and supported one another. They had done this many times and knew exactly where to strike. It was fast, it was brutal, it was numbing. Now we were already into the final days, the denouement of a world's execution. Their final remaining capital city stood before us, a huge walled urban complex towering over what had once been fertile plains. The outworks were in flames on all sides, struck by multiple simultaneous assaults. The atmosphere had been turned into sheets of igniting promethium vapor. The fields churned up into a poison, boiling quagmire. Defensive bastions that had withstood every insurrection and Xenos incursion during the dark days of old night were now piles of smoldering rubble. After my rhino had been destroyed and my rescuers had come for me by air, I actually had a better chance to witness events at an even closer range. I managed to twist my head around to get a blurred view out of the gunship's narrow slit windows. Amid all the flying ash and muck, I saw high ramparts with immense gouges carved into them. The terrain below was thick with armored vehicles blasting their way through the breaches, supported by armored warriors racing to overwhelm any isolated pocket of resistance. I could barely make out any defenders in the fire-blown gloom. They were being routed now, knocked back and buried alive as their citadels fell apart around them. I did spy some resistance holding out between the enormous shells of two bombed black cylindrical towers, a knot of fighters in heavy armored suits attempting to maintain a defensive position with support from some kind of multi-legged mechanized walkers. The volume of fire they laid down looked impressive. Energy beams that briefly flared neon blue, backed up by projectiles hurled from the open barrels of static launchers. It didn't last. Just before the gunships, barreling flight, carried them out of view, I saw Legion heavy weapons erupt right back at them, zeroed down on the enemy lines with exceptional precision. I'm no expert on munitions. Were those bulkhead beams in that hurricane? Lasbers bolstered with bolt rounds and explosive charges. Maybe all of those things. The important thing was the targeting, which was perfect. The fusillade destroyed the position, blasting apart the walls on either side, the barricades, the pillboxes, then drilling down until plumes of superheated earth shot up from the cracks like geysers. This was more than warfare. This was, just as the Primarch had promised, annihilation. The Blood Angels weren't here to take this place. They were here to destroy it, to raze it, to leave every wall demolished and every avenue ripped out. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Every time I squinted through the viewers, I saw more acts of extremity. Much of the macro scale destruction had been dealt out by heavy armor, but the infantry was everywhere too. They didn't need to be, I guess. They could have sat back and let the tanks blow the enemy defenses apart, but they chose to get up close, to draw their power swords and axes, and get stuck in. I could hear their full-throated battle cries even over all the frantic revving and burst explosions, expressing a kind of manic fury that I'd not have guessed they possessed. I stole a quick glance at my companion, the one who rescued me. He was paying me no attention at all, but peering hard into the local area auspex readings. Every so often, as the gunship banked, he looked through the viewports, as if trying to pinpoint something definitive at ground level. The others remained silent, barely moving as we were hurtled around in the air. I couldn't understand it. 5 Space Marines were a priceless asset. Still, they must have had their orders, and I wasn't going to ask any questions just then. By rights, I should have been terrified or maybe repulsed. Somehow, though, I wasn't. The adrenaline of the ride had banished my ever-present fatigue, and my heart was pumping hard. I kept watching. I drank it all in, the pace, the scale, the almost comical levels of demolition. I was a part of this, just a piece of driftwood held aloft by the riptide of the Legion's fury. But I was here, right at the center of it all. I could write about this, I knew. I could conjure up this picture for the Imperium, both as inspiration and a warning. They are angels in the archaic sense, I found myself rehearsing. Messengers of a distant throne, prosecutors of its pitiless law. Then the gunship suddenly veered, tilting hard, and I jerked my head up. A wide expanse of ruins briefly opened up across the view slit, a whole cavalcade of smashed and flickering tower carcasses. I saw a mighty ziggurat looking edifice rising from the heart of the inferno, dark as beaten lead, still partially intact, and extending for more than a kilometer in both axes. Causeways jutted out to connect with vast arched gateways, each throbbing with neon blue light. The fighting was furious across every surface, spilling across ramparts and parapets, and surging down access ramps and hangar gates. I didn't look at any of those hundreds of individual duels and struggles, despite the fact that Wilecum were putting up fierce resistance here. Of course they would. This had to be their final palace, their lone remaining command and control center, the seat of their almost extinct civilization. I didn't look at any of that because only one sight held any possible attention. He was there. This was where he was fighting, leading from the front, delivering the killing blow with his own immaculate hands. I only got a glimpse, just a few seconds before we were hurtling away again to wherever the pilots had been ordered to reach and sit down. It was enough though, because time seemed to dilate whenever he was present. The flying debris appeared to slow, the wavering flames to grind into the mire, all to give him his proper setting, the gallery around the gemstone. The cherubim were in action. They were in their heavy Terminator plate, carrying gigantic shields, wielding swords, spears, and long-handled axes. They were fighting in difficult terrain, tangles of rebar and blown masonry, and they were simply smashing their way through it, vaporizing obstacles and hurling aside barriers. Despite all the confusion and dust-blown haze, they maintained tight formation, a circle around a defended core. I saw Belsepitus there, and could hardly believe the transformation in him. All their movements were incredibly fast, given the size of their armor, and that made them all the more horrific, like a nightmare at unnatural pace or a fever dream where time was sped up. They were the bodyguard of their lord, and they fought like it, placing themselves in harm's way, using their individual shields to form a single arced line of defense. As for him, for Sanguinius, I don't know how long he'd been fighting. Probably hours, maybe days. His armor was no longer gold, but black and red, charred by the flames and stained by the blood he'd already let. Fully extended, his wings looked both magnificent and awful. The pearlescent sheen had been replaced with a mess of blood and debris accumulated from his descent into the cauldrons of combat. The structures around him were little more than a tangle of broken struts and spars, radiating out from him in a concave hemisphere, as if he crashed into them from above and created the blast wave on impact. He was surrounded by shattered bodies, all from the ranks of the enemy. Survivors swarmed at him. These were their greatest fighters, clad in heavy ironwork warplate and bearing glittering energy blades, scrapping desperately amidst the debris of their citadel's core. It was as if the Caribbean had admitted only those as a sacrifice, keeping the rabble at bay while their lord dispatch the best of them. Sanguinius rose from the city's wreckage with a single thrust of his bloodied wings, dripping gore and oil from the pinions, shedding broken scraps of enemy armor from the shining tip of his great spear, lashing out with movements so precise and so fast that even establishing cause and effect was hard. He was unhelmed. Amid the lattice of energy weapons and flying projectiles, his face was exposed. Oh, thank you. Where was I? I lost my spot. The expression in them was beyond anger. I don't know if I even have a word for it. A kind of wild, cold frenzy, only barely held in check by the armor that encased him. He was radiant but terrible, resplendent but panic-inducing. Even as I watched, he ripped apart one of the enemy's greatest champions, smashing its armored hide into slivers and hurling the carcass back down to the inferno below. It was only a fragment, and I'm no expert on the ways of combat, but I saw something in that moment that took my breath away. The way he fought, it was too good to be true. He couldn't possibly have been that fast, that perfect, by simply reacting, as we all did, to the evidence of our senses. There was something else going on. It was as if the future unveiled itself to him a little earlier than anyone else, as if he were able to snatch at the curtain of ignorance and pull it back. Maybe only moments, maybe just a few seconds, but it was enough. To go up against Sanguinius was to be faced with a soul acting barely within the laws of time and space, something that bulged at the constraints of matter, that operated a hair's width beyond the possible. It was superhuman. It was hyperhuman. Then the vision was lost, and we raced onward. And I realized I hadn't drawn breath the whole time. He had spoken so quietly, so reasonably, when in the confines of civilization. Here, though, in this arena, he had been transformed. Ever been a soldier? Maybe that's how it had to be. The galaxy was a dangerous place, and we had to be thankful the Primarchs were on our side in the struggle for mastery of it. It must have put the fear of false gods into those who faced it. Before I reflect on it any further, maybe think about how I might put the experience into words. The gunship dropped sharply. There, snapped the Space Marine, the one with the eye device on his pauldron. I didn't see what he had noticed, but the remainder of the Blood Angels readied their weapons. The gunship fell hard, angling through incoming torrents of las fire before crashing to the ground in a cloud of dust and mud splatters. The doors cracked open, and my deliverer lumbered out. Just before he left, he turned to one of his warriors. "Stay with him." Then he was gone, along with all but one of my companions. I got a view of the ruins beyond, burning freely and strewn with torn metal and masonry. I saw refuse clogged avenues, between collapsed structures and a sky lit with kaleidoscopes of ordnance. The wall of noise was still crushing, booms and crashes, and the keening howl of engines under stress. But something else cut through it. A scream, I thought, but almost non human, like an animal being slaughtered. I couldn't make out where it was coming from, but the blood angels raced off into the flickering gloom towards it. When the doors closed, my now lone companion looked at me. I looked back at him. "What was that?" I asked. He didn't reply. Of course he didn't. The gunship lifted off again, powering up from the boiling quagmire it had just created, and we were speeding deeper in. The viewports filled up with smoke, and I lost my view of the city. We carried on traveling, faster and faster. I began to wonder if we'd ever stop. I felt sick again, perhaps a delayed reaction to the shock of being pulled out of the mud, or of seeing the Primarch up close, or one of 100 other reasons. I didn't like battles, I decided. It was lucky then, I thought, that the ones who had to fight them so clearly did. No, thank you, Raditz. Have a drink. Chapter 7. The gunship put down again less than an hour later, and they let me out. The fighting didn't last much longer than that, and at least in that segment of the city. I stumbled into a world of fog and bitter tasting smoke, drearily cooling down as the last of the explosions echoed away. I dropped to my haunches, worried I might throw up. What did you do? If you vomited in one of these suits? What if you were in a tox cloud and couldn't take the helm off? Thankfully, I managed to keep control. The Blood Angel, who had been silently keeping an eye on me, no longer seemed interested in staying close to hand. The danger had passed. They had seen to that. I walked away from the landing site, not sure what I was doing or where I ought to be going. I wanted to observe, to get a sense of how they fought, but had succeeded only in nearly dying and then missing most of the action. Now the bulk of the killing was over. The smoldering streets around me were already being patrolled by Legion scout teams, rooting through the embers for survivors. I decided to try to get some kind of overview, to salvage something that I could use when I came to record it all for posterity. I limped along a wide thoroughfare, its base heaped with the broken bodies of the slain and strewn with the wreckage of Welcome vehicles, before coming across the semi-intact shell of a large building, one that still commanded views over what remained of the rest of the city. I found an open doorway, slipped inside, then clambered up an internal stairway. I went up several stories before finally emerging at the summit, a wide chamber with every window smashed. A few bodies lay in the corner, none of them moving. They weren't warriors, by the look of them, just citizens of this unfortunate place, caught up in its unwanted liberation. You can always tell the victims of Space Marines. A standard las gun leaves a fairly discreet wound, a puncture hole where the energy burns into fabric and skin, but the weapons used by the Legions aren't like that. A bolt round isn't explosive and has explosive effects. The blades they use are gigantic, frequently sheathed in fearsome energies. They obliterate bodies. They slice them into chunks, rip them apart, throw the pieces around. I didn't look too closely at the corpses in that place because I knew what I'd see. A collection of butcher's remnants, slowly seeping away in prodigious slicks of blood. I picked my way through the rubble until I was at the very edge of the chamber where the windows would have been before being blown to smithereens. I brushed the worst of the glass slivers away with my sleeve and rested my elbows on the sill. A hot, humid wind buffeted me. I saw a color-drained vista of mud slicks and blackened ruins. It looked like some huge and oily sea had surged up to dissolve the entire place. A few buildings still stood, but most were demolished or on fire. I could just about make out the enormous structure that Sanguinius had been busy in. That was wreathed in smoke now, occasionally lit up by secondary detonations. Here and there I caught a glimpse of the Blood Angels at work still, tactical squads pushing their way methodically down avenues, firing sparsely. Atmospheric buzz the scenes, some hovering to provide air support to ground units, others strafing distant targets. The noises of proper combat were a long way off now. Dull crumps and booms as the auxilia pressed through the straggling northern outworks. I couldn't see any sign of the Primarch. I also couldn't see where the Blood Angel who'd rescued me had gone. His squad had disappeared into the mazes of jagged wall tops, hunting whatever it was he had detected from the air. I couldn't even decide what to think. On the one hand, the display was undeniably impressive, clinical even. Every plan they had devised had been enacted by the same kind of artistry they extended to all their endeavors. They had given all the warnings they possibly could, holding back, till the moment had come, and they had done just as they had promised they would do. No deception, no tricks. On the other hand, the scale of the destructions was, if I'm honest, sickening. These were humans, our kind, survivors of the darkest period in our long history. Was the punishment proportionate? How many would be left alive to rebuild the world once the angels had finished their work? Maybe that didn't matter. No doubt millions could be shipped in to take the place of those who died. The important thing was that the crusade continued to expand, hold every vestige of humanity's old domains and bring them kicking and screaming into the new age of unity. I swallowed uneasily. The air was already beginning to taste fouler. A lot of bodies lay in this place, and the incinerators and biohazard teams had not yet got to work. I reckoned I'd see enough for now. Somewhere, somehow, there had to be a lander that could take me up to the ships in orbit. I went back down the empty stairwells, picking my way past refuse and shell cases. Once back at ground level, I went aimlessly, headed roughly northwards, not really paying attention to my surroundings. My stomach felt empty, my head was light. Up above me, the sky was getting darker, shadowed by gathering clouds that looked ready to unload. Rain might be a good thing. It would wash the filth out, ready for someone to start again. As the light faded and the smell got worse, I lost my way. Of course I did. Everything I did, everything I touched, seemed cursed that day. I tried to retrace my steps back to the transport and ended up in a place that looked like it had been pummeled worse than the rest. Hardly a stone lay in its place. The ground was undulating seascape of rubble, some of it still hot, and my boots slipped and scraped as I tried to crest the waves. I was almost out of the far side when I slipped badly, skittering down a long slope of burned stone before grinding to a dusty halt. I put my hand out to steady myself, and my gauntlet hit something soft and unyielding. I looked down to see a body half buried in the rubble. It belonged to one of the city's inhabitants, one of its soldiers, clad in that familiar dark metal armor, but with the helm knocked off. Unlike the casualties I encountered earlier, this one hadn't suffered catastrophic wounds. In fact, I couldn't see any major trauma at all. The armor plates were more or less intact. The man's face, though, was horrific. His skin was white, white as spoiled milk, and almost translucent. I could see sinews under the surface, withered and dry. His eyes bulged from their sockets. His cheeks were sucked in and tight to the bone. My hand had connected with his exposed throat, and when I jerked it back, the imprints of my fingers remained in place. For a moment, I just stared. I couldn't see how the man had died. Chem weapons of some kind? Maybe. Though I couldn't have, though I hadn't been warned to stay clear of any discharges. He reminded me of an old vid book I'd once seen of a spider draining its prey of its vital juices. The expression of that dried up face was one of absolute panic, a static scream that was frozen in place forever. My wits returned, and I pushed the husk away, then scrambled back up the scree slip. By the time I got to the top, I was shaking. My nausea came back with a vengeance, and this time I knew I was going to retch for sure. I managed to unclasp my helm with trembling fingers and got my rebreather out of the way just in time. Then I bent double and heaved up onto the muddy floor. When I was finished, I wiped my mouth, stood up again, tried to recover my composure. My head was hammering. I needed something to drink. For the first time, I was breathing the air of that world unfiltered. The dust and chemicals were acrid, and I fought again. Before I replaced it, though, how the place stank. Humans, tens of thousands of them, festering the torpid air, their sightless eyes staring up at the heavens as if for deliverance, which was ironic because that's where their problem had come from. I blinked hard, swallowed my bile down. I tried to get myself together again, started to walk, to stumble. I was safe, I knew that. No enemies remained here, no threats to my person. I just had to get out now. But all I could see as I stumbled onward in search of something to lift me out of that place was the face, the hollow eyes, and the pulled tight cheeks. And I knew that I'd never be free of it, and that wherever I went after that, I'd still see it. I got too close, far too close, and already I could sense that I'd struggle to get out again. When he found me, Belcepitus wasn't pleased. His evident view that we remembrancers were a distraction at best and a danger at worst had only been reinforced by my venturing off on my own. He hadn't wanted to come after me at all, I was sure. He had 100 better things to do. He had wait, he had 100 better things to be doing and was anxious to be doing them. He found me all the same. I don't remember where I got to by then, but I do remember the descent of his shuttle. He put it down almost on top of me, as if to punish me for giving him a headache. By then I knew a lot more about Belcepitus. I knew that he was extremely influential, extremely ambitious, extremely dangerous. He was wearing Terminator armor this time, which made him even more ludicrously bulky than before. As he descended from the shuttle to get me, his heavy treads made the stone crack. The air itself fizzed from all the excess heat being given off from the reactor at his back. You could almost forget there was a person at the heart of all of that heaped up ceremony. And just before the machine exterior, the pipes and the vents, the pistons and the motors. Perhaps that was why these people decorated every battlesuit so carefully to remind themselves that, in some highly attenuated way, these were still things for humans to wear. Are you hurt? He demanded. I shook my head, just looking around. You could have been killed. It's my job. He snorted, expressing perfectly what he thought of that. Then he grabbed me by the arm, not gently, and hauled me to the shuttle. He pushed me up the ramp, and I wasn't stupid enough to try to resist. We took off and were soon angling over the city again. It went well then, I offered. By the Primarch's will, he said curtly. I still hadn't got used to the way they spoke about him. Why, Dara and all other humans were respectful enough, but for the Space Marines, it went beyond that. It wasn't worship exactly, which wouldn't have been tolerated anyway. but it wasn't entirely removed from that. Certainly, the total lack of doubt was striking. I'd spoken to army officers who clearly held their superiors in contempt, even when following their orders. But I doubted that Bell's separatists could even conceive of second guessing his Primarch. The link of authority was so powerful, so complete, that each individual warrior could be seen as an adjunct of their master's singular will. They were genetically linked, after all, and steeped in a culture of total and unquestioning obedience. I could see the advantages of that. I thought even then that I could see the disadvantages too. Were you fighting with him? I asked. Bill Sepatis grunted irritably, but he didn't answer. Perhaps he'd been given orders to be helpful. Close to him, yes. What's it like? He looked at me, nonplussed. He didn't reply for a moment. I thought maybe I'd offended him, or that he somehow didn't understand quite what I meant. When he finally answered me, it was a far fuller response than I'd expected. They tell me you have some art, he said. You would have to be in the position you occupy. That is your point, is it not? So imagine every time you pick up a quill, you find yourself in the presence of the greatest writer who ever lived, a creator so peerless and immaculate that anything you produce, by contrast, must appear to you shabby and unworthy. And every time you try to emulate that art, to mimic it, you must always fall short, because only one soul in all creation can possibly be so perfect. And then imagine you cannot even walk away from that vocation, take up something else, because you have been made down to every last molecule for this one purpose. You are trapped, pursuing your objective, knowing that you must fail, and every time, no matter what you do, the evidence of your shortcoming will be right in front of you. But you venerate the artistry all the same. More than that, you love it, and thus you are torn. Shame because you can never ascend the pinnacle. Adoration because you seek for what it is, a kind of unreality, sanctioned magic. I just looked at him while he spoke. The voice was as dispassionate as ever, and of course I couldn't see his face. It is like that, said Belcepitus. So it pains you because of the possibilities he reveals. I don't understand that, I told him truthfully. I don't understand you. Everything you do, everything you are. You have all the gifts, but it seems torturous somehow. Transfiguration comes only through suffering. I wondered if that was a ballet expression. It might well have been, given that place's history. Or maybe it was something he'd come up with himself. He was a surprisingly intense soul. Perhaps they all were. The shuttle began to slow down, and I realized we were coming into land again. No doubt my host had somewhere important to be once I'd been shuffled off back into safety. The one who came to get me, I said, knowing my time with him was running out. I didn't recognize his insignia, an eye inside a flame. What was that? The interior shuddered as we dropped to earth. Bell Separatist looked at me with his unknowable helm mask, as beautiful as it was fearsome. There are many designations, he said, but which one was it? The landing gear hit, and we both swayed with the impact. He got up, opened the door, made ready to leave. I saw other members of the Legion moving outside, as well as other ships waiting to take off. Go back to the fleet now, Remembrancer, he said, clunking heavily down the ramp and not looking back. You have the run of the archives, I am told, so if you have questions, you can find the answers there. Chapter 8. Let's take a water break. Full compliance took several weeks to complete. Smashing the enemy's main defenses had been the easy part. Now the harder work began. Despite my worst fears while wandering the city, this was not an act of conscious genocide. Most of the planet's substantial population had survived the ferocious bombardment and would now be pressed into service to new masters. For all for all that, their independent institutions, their armies, their government, their administrative classes had been completely erased. An expeditionary fleet contained all the resources within itself to impose a new system of governance. The Mechanicum creation ships would drop whole manufactoria down, all packaged up and modularized, and ready to assemble themselves according to standard plant patterns. Excuse me. Political education officers would be sent down in battalions, each one primed to expound and disseminate the imperial truth in the imperial truth to a newly cowed citizenry. The staff of the new governor's department would be heavily made up of incomers, each of whom knew how the vast interplanetary bureaucracy worked, how to requisition the resources they needed, and how to build up the recruitment base that was, in truth, the main thing the Imperium now required of them. Months of work lay ahead to get all of that put in place, but it was striking just how quickly these people worked. They'd done it before on hundreds of other worlds, and by now the routine was deeply entrenched. Give it a decade or two, and the Wileg would be just another point on the cartographs. Another node in the glittering web of domains that spread steadily across the entire galaxy. I went back to the red tier and planned to stay there for as long as everything took. The cities would have the smell of death on them for some time yet, even once the cleanup teams had been through them. So I didn't fancy making a second trip. I wrote up some notes, observations of how the battles had seemed to me. I didn't think many people would be interested in reading them, mostly because such accounts must have been very common in an imperium that had been at war for as long as it had existed. I wrote about him too, of course, that one sight of him, as much as I could remember. I continued to study what remained of the Blood Angels' military operations. I watched from a distance through scopes, auspex, and cartolith projections as the Primarch led his troops against the increasingly feeble holdouts. It was a fascinating experience. You could see if you dialed the instruments correctly and focused the lenses carefully, the entire operation unfolding in real time. You could pick out the individual squads, the armored support, the air cover, all moving together in that impeccably choreographed ballet that was so very hard to counter. The more I watched those points of light, the position runes and the vector lines, the more I saw the patterns. All of the units, whether it be dozens or hundreds or thousands, moved in relation to the single dot at the center, the Primarch who led them. It was more than just response to commands, I began to realize. The whole thing was a single organism, a living creature with limbs, lungs, and a heart. The point of light moved naturally, spontaneously. I knew there would be tangible communications going on down there, but I saw that it had to be more than that. The responses were too immediate, too unconscious. He was a part of them, and they were part of him, and the link that bound them all was tighter than I'd ever have guessed. I couldn't study those feeds forever, though. What was more, some of the results from the intra-fleet comms that I tailored for my studies were strange. Some ships had already left Lilac, even though I knew that no reassignment was scheduled for weeks. I couldn't determine who or what was on those ships, and no one was able or willing to tell me. I made a note of it all and promised that I'd look it up. I was beginning to have a nagging feeling that, despite all the invitations to inquire, plenty was going on under the surface that people were either unaware of or wouldn't talk about. They were a secretive people, I was beginning to realize, as much by inclination and temperament as anything else. They preferred to live underground, away from the heat and sickness of the sun. They fashioned masks to wear and decorated them with loving care. Perhaps I should have pushed harder at that intuition, but by then I was struggling to work again. I couldn't write more than short bursts, and my brief exposure to the reality of the battles had left my nerves frayed. Sleep was as elusive as ever. I took to walking the endless corridors of the flagship during the noctis shifts, lost in a fog of fatigue and with my head hammering. My dreams were becoming far too florid for comfort, and they no longer acted as an inspiration but made me feel strangely wretched. The Primarch was still in them, but no longer with his serene gaze. He was vengeful now, and mired in dirt and gore. I tried to put such images out of my mind. They weren't helpful. It's commonplace to describe those places, those great ships, as cities in space. The red tier was beyond that. It was a world of its own, a totally enclosed, iron and steel planetoid with its own history, nations, and cultures. Tens of thousands, at least, crewed its upper levels. A similar number dwelled in its dank and echoing villages. Some parts of that ship were so rarely visited that I suspected most of the regular crew didn't even know they existed. The transition could be profound. One moment you were in the lamp-lit officer staff decks, where the crew saluted you as you passed them, and all was smart and efficient. The next you were in a world of shadows and malfunctioning lumens, the deck sticky with spilt oils, the thrum of the engines oppressive and all-consuming. Most of the bulkhead doors would open down there, but plenty were jammed or locked. You could get lost quickly and find yourself in gloomy recesses with old paintings peeled from the walls. The inhabitants of those regions didn't look you in the eye, but scurried off like rats. Some looked as sick as I felt. Some looked sicker. It was inevitable, I suppose. The glorious front couldn't be maintained everywhere, and nothing could be immaculate all the way down. Still, I was frustrated to find so many chambers off limits and was struck by the unnerving atmosphere of the deep places. At times, I would catch the eye of someone before they melted away into darkness. They weren't hostile, not exactly, but they weren't welcoming either. I thought they were afraid, maybe very afraid, and I didn't know why, because no threats to them could have existed here, not on the angel's own void palace. I couldn't I couldn't hang around too long down there, which was maybe for the best. I needed to remain in places with steady lumens and clean air. I didn't know how much of that was my usual run of ailments and how much was a hangover from the things I'd seen on the planet's surface. But I wondered if Wygera was right, and I'd been affected by Val's poison somehow. I'd taken all the countermeasures, but something might have slipped through. I took more medication and hoped it would kick in. To keep myself occupied, I did as Bell Separatist had suggested and visited the ship's archives. The main record chamber was a magnificent place, as well appointed as any librarian on any civilized world. It was a high domed palace, maybe 50 meters tall, the walls lined with shelves from floor to ceiling. The many terraces were of polished wood, the spiral staircases marble, the fine fittings bronze and gold. Suspensors floated like jewels amid the warm haze. Menials padded to and fro, collecting books for the scholars to look at. It was never very busy, and the long polished tables were mostly empty whenever I visited. Sometimes a member of the Legion would be present, perhaps one of their newly limited librarians, poring over some treatise or other. I occasionally saw others of senior rank, there to study or analyze tactical reports from other theaters. Nothing I unearthed got me any closer to deciphering the meaning of the sigil of the eye. The way the Blood Angels decorated their armor was in any case highly individual. I suspected that only a fraction of the marks visible on their battleplate were part of official schemes, but instead reflected personal aesthetic or cultural choices. Any attempt I made to inquire about the mysterious symbol came to nothing. I began to wonder if I'd imagined it. Things had been confused down there after all. It was while I was busy with that, surrounded by heaps of heavy books that told me lots about the heraldry of the old clans on Bal Secundus, that Widera came back. As she sat opposite me, I realized how long it had been since we spoke. She looked well, glowing in fact. Keeping busy? She asked. Very. How about you? Excuse me. She brought out a portable projector, adjusted it, and conjured up a two-dimensional projection. It was her latest project, a half-finished portrait of the Primarch at war. She was good, very good. The likeness was impressive, the composition excellent, but it wasn't him. It wasn't the avatar of destruction I'd witnessed on the surface, his wings dripping and his eyes ablaze. This was a serene effigy of gold and silver, floating seemingly without effort over a battlefield of steadily advancing blood angels. I didn't see much evidence of the death and wreckage that choked the ruins either, just an almost bloodless assault that was leaving the towers more or less intact. What do you think? She asked. I tried to find something nice to say. It's beautifully done. She laughed. You hate it. No, I know why. She leaned close, smirking. Your commitment to the truth, your mentality. You don't like to see things made to look nice. Well, but what do you think we're doing here? Why do you think our hosts even tolerate us? To say whatever we want? Huh, you're amusing to me. So this was going to be a lecture. I let her talk. This has to succeed. It has to. And it only succeeds because there are 100 worlds supplying this fleet, all of them churning out guns and ships and support regiments. Every manufacturing line has prints of these images hanging over them, and those prints need to be the kind of thing that keeps them stamping the shell cases and stitching the epaulettes. They don't need your grime and nuance. They need something to get them up in the morning and off to the first shift. I just think Well, he's already impressive enough, is he? Maybe. But an image has to be simple, flawless, something you can repeat verbatim, the same on every world it's found on. I get that. But you'll be different, right? You'll write things up as they really are. I shrugged. I mean, you were the one who picked me. You knew what I'd done before. Your name's known. It'll get it'll get you readers. And when they see that you have come around to all of this, have seen the light about the crusade, it'll have a value. I smiled grimly. So that's what this is. Not my talent. You've got plenty of that too. You just need to use it now. I nodded. I thought about it. Thing is, though, I'll have to scratch that scab. I'll have to lift it up and see what's underneath. Can't help myself. I looked up at her. Don't worry, he's astonishing. I can let everyone know that, and there'd be no word of a lie in it. But you must have noticed it, all of them here. I looked around, checked we weren't being obviously overheard. There's something off. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I don't know. I can't put my finger on it. They ought to be swaggering. They're phenomenal. What was it? 5 days to conquer that world? That's insane. They're not swaggering though. They walk as if their own shadows are trying to trip them up. I raised my eyebrows, spread my hands. Maybe nothing. I don't know. I haven't been very well. I just get a sense about them. Not just them, him. She laughed again, disbelievingly. Your standards are pretty high. Yeah, don't misunderstand me. I saw him down there. Awe-inspiring, literally. But do you ever... I trailed off. I didn't know what I was trying to say. There's so much I can't get at. Things they won't tell me. Ships have gone back to Val. You know that. They didn't have any markers. Nothing on the schedules. I only found out because it got picked up on a combat feed I tinkered with. And I got rescued by this warrior, and no one even seems to know he existed. But I'm sure he did. They're not being straight with me. Maybe you too. I thought she'd scoff at all that. It sounded pathetic, and I was the one speaking. She didn't scoff though. You can talk to him, she said. You have that favor. I don't know if I dare it. You should. It's why you're here. I didn't like the thought of it. Just being in his presence was intimidating enough. But actually trying to do my job, that was properly daunting. A part of me wanted nothing more than to get back to my cabin, try to get some rest, maybe erase all the notes in my journal. His wings, though, had been covered in blood. I'll think about it, I said. He looked at me with those soulful eyes. They weren't blazing with fury anymore. Looking back at them then, I could barely reconstruct what his expression had been like before. I couldn't imagine it. He seemed as if he never got angry, like one of the graven images in his extensive statue gardens, or maybe one of Widera's portraits, cool, serene, immovable. Few people ask me of those days anymore, Sanguinius said. They seem like another age to me now. We were alone in one of his many private chambers. I'd seen a few of those back then. They were all exquisite, not austere, as you might have expected from a warrior general, but supremely luxurious, kitted out with objects that were both refined and rare. The placement of them, the schemes of color and form, it was all impeccable. He was a collector, this Primarch, but not a greedy or an indiscriminate one. I'd seen his home world, its richly hued deserts and its poisoned skies, and guessed that the arid aesthetic informed his choices. He had been raised in abject poverty and now enjoyed riches. He could be allowed that, surely. I'm sure your recall is perfect, I said. We were sitting in semi-darkness, lit only by half a dozen jeweled suspensors. Sanguinius had a goblet of wine in his hand and hadn't offered any to me. I wonder if it was the thing Eris had told me about, Karash. He wasn't armored. He wore white robes, a red cloak, artfully cut to allow his wings to unfurl. He sat on a throne made to accommodate him. I sat on a standardized chair, albeit raised up on a small platform so I wasn't completely dwarfed. I didn't record the conversation. He told me he didn't mind if I did, but I never liked doing it. It had an effect on what people said if they knew it was being transcribed the whole time onto a recitation core. Still, he knew why I was with the fleet. He knew what I was writing, the definitive work on him, the one that I dare hope would inspire even more bullet stampers and uniform stitchers. Perhaps he tailored what he said, but I don't think so. He had among his attributes the power to make you think that he was not only telling you the whole truth, but that he was capable of doing otherwise. You believed him, and I thought even then that this power was perhaps his greatest asset of all. Weapons and strength can take you a long way, but being believed in this most deceptive of ages carried the promise of bringing the entire galaxy with him. I was an infant, Sanguinius said, barely alive. I opened my eyes and I remember what I saw. One blink, nothing. Another, and I was somewhere made of light that screamed at me. A third, and I was under a red sun. I didn't even have the word for it then. Sun. The heat was incredible. I tried to move. I was in the wreckage of something and felt the pain of it. I couldn't call for help. I didn't wish to call in any case. I was not afraid. I was curious, though I sensed the danger. Most of all, curious about myself. He took a sip of that dark liquid. I wondered about my wings. I wondered why I had them. I wondered how they were to be used. He smiled. Isn't that strange? When you were young, did you ever wonder about your legs, your arms? Of course not. They have always been part of you. But I was conscious, right from the very start, that these things were unnatural. They were the result of something unforeseen. I tell you truly, despite all that I know now, I can't explain their origin. They've never felt a part of me. At times, I get the sense that they belong to another soul altogether, and that one day they will be ripped from me and given back to their true owner. Who knows? I read about your time on Val, I said. What you did to unify it. Unify it. He looked thoughtful. The first ones to discover me became my tribe, the pureblood. They bickered, debating whether I should be slain or rescued. I just listened, knowing even then that they were no threat to me. They decided to take me in. If they had not, I would have to kill them all, just as I killed the scorpions and the snakes that infested every inch of the desert. And then maybe the others would have come across me sooner or later, and perhaps I would have been a monarch of mutants instead of their persecutor. Because I was a child, you see. It was all chance who found me first, or something akin to chance. I didn't know what I wanted. I was the first stone of the avalanche, capable of being tumbled by the wind itself. I didn't hate those who had been poised and turned into beasts. Even later, when I was slaughtering them, they were victims of choices made by others centuries earlier. If only, if, if anything, I felt a certain kinship to them. My only prospect was to rule a world where every grain of sand was toxic. When I was there, I sensed the poison was still there. I asked why it hadn't been cleansed. I was told that madness was preferable to erasure. Who told you that? Alexa Eris, one of your auxilia. I'll have to look her up. I like that. He sat back, letting his limbs relax. I won't have Secundus touched. It's where we came from. Poisons give you gifts. If you survive the bite of them, you can survive much else too. You may be gifted visions in your fever. You may become able to transmute the killing element to become a vessel of purity. I have never been a king of healthy people, not like my esteemed brother Rabute say. I have always been the master of wretches, and have learned from that. I am a wretch myself, a non-standard. To purify and to transform, that has been our gift. We suck in the sickness, we embrace it, and within our souls it changes into beauty. Just as you did with the Revenant Legion? No, they did that to themselves. I learned from my upbringing. When I met them for the first time, long after my father had found me, I asked them to accept me, not the other way around. The hunted, the strange, the infirm, we have always been the askers, the demanders, not the demanders. So they understood that. When we began our transformation, I was led by them as much as I imposed anything. They were ready to become stronger. They were ready to transform. And so we did it together. I looked around me. You couldn't escape it. All the finery, all the decoration, It was all so spectacular, but it could become numbing, like an overspiced dish that you had to keep eating. And this is the result, I said. There's no secret about it, Sanguinius said. They were the dregs of terror. They knew that. It plagued them, even when their bodies had been transformed, just like the blood they needed another kind of transfiguration, the soul as well as the body. They turned their minds to creation, to the accomplishments of civilization, and in doing so, purged the sickness. And it worked, did it? He looked he looked directly at me. I struggled not to avert my eyes immediately. Even then, a few moments being scrutinized by him were enough to make my palms damp and my heartbeat quicken. What do you mean? You've changed them. For good. It took him a long time before he replied. We are now what we have always been, he said carefully. We did not move into another category. We improved on what was already there. But you remain different, set apart. In what way? I hesitated to find the right words. I saw you fight. I can't get the images out of my head. It was as if you could see something none of us could, ahead of time, like you had privileged access. Sanguinius nodded. That gift, he said, far more valuable than the wings I wear. But don't think of it as infallible. It is a weak facility, as faulty as often as it tells true. He ran his fingertip around the rim of his goblet. Foresight, sometimes of concrete things, the way an enemy moves, the curve of an axe, sometimes of more nebulous things, the shape of the crusade, the fate of a soul. That must make you almost invulnerable. Sanguinius shrugged. Not really. A vision can lead you into error, or even if it is true, you can take the wrong path by seeking to achieve it. It can come to obsess you. You see a fate you wish to avoid, and in preventing it, you cause greater harm. Or you become possessed by longing for something good and put aside your duty to achieve it, and in doing so, lose yourself. It has its uses, but I do not see it as a blessing. Then do you see what the future holds for yourself? No, at least not yet. For the Imperium? In no great detail, believe me. Fractured glimpses of possibilities are mostly less useful than nothing. Some of the time, sure. Still, it must be invaluable on occasion. It has been. It will be again. All in the service of the Legion, which will continue to evolve until you are paragons, admired by all of the Imperium. We have already earned the reputation. I agree, but you work a little too hard at it, don't you? My stomach tightened. I didn't know why I was pushing this. I mean, the gold, the enamel, the lacquer. It's like you want us to think it's a mask. Sanguinius smiled. throne. His smile was so agreeable. A plastered face over something less refined. We all project. We all have things deep down we like to keep under wraps. So we do. He put the goblet down, placed his hands together. But where is this coming from, remembrancer? Just your usual fondness for finding fault in those who fight on your behalf, or something more specific? I was rescued on Wylak by a warrior of your legion, one with an eye within a flame on his arm. What is that? One of the Ophanim, one of the orders of the first sphere. No one talks about them. No, they do not. They are charged with watching over their brothers. For what? Lapses in discipline, failures of control. I've seen your legion fight. They wouldn't refuse an order, least of all from you. All institutions police themselves. The Imperial Army does. My brothers' legions do so. It is hardly uncommon. I was getting tired, unreasonably tired. The ache behind my temples getting worse, and even the subdued light from the suspensors made my eyes water. But there is a fear in your sons, I said cautiously, fearful that I said too much or were simply wrong. Those who should feel no fear by rights carry doubt about something. Maybe they don't even know what it is or for what reason. I blinked hard. Maybe others have it too. Maybe others sense it. I mean, you were made war master. That spilled out unbidden. I wasn't even sure where it came from. For the first time, Sanguinius looked taken aback. That is true. Why not? I had gone all in now, so I just pressed on. No one could ever tell me why. My father was not required to state a reason. The most beloved of them all, the one the people looked up to, the most popular of your brotherhood, with a combat record to match the very best. I never understood it. Did it not hurt to miss out? Was it unjust? Or is there something we're all missing here? You were looking for something that does not exist. My brother Horace was always first among equals, just as he still is. So they never gave you an explanation. He was about to reply to that. I could see the response forming on his lips. I felt he was about to tell me something he had not spoken of before, or maybe only rarely. I don't know why I had that certainty. I may be imagining it with hindsight. In any case, it didn't come. Faint bleep indicated an urgent incoming message, and he looked away. A vox bead of his collar lit up, and I could hear the faint sound of someone relaying information. I couldn't catch most of the words. Sanguinius calmly asked for clarification, pressed on a few points, then finally he said, "Play the Audex for me." And what I did hear, I have never forgotten it, for it meant that we would not be here for long at all. The trivial contests of Lilac would soon be forgotten, not just by us, but by everyone. The words that came over the comlink, second or third hand were almost inaudible, the product of a soul operating under extreme duress. This world is murder. Chapter 9. That is where we will stop today. Thank you for watching.